the Worm Ouroboros, that were in the lofty presence chamber fair, and lovely to behold, and of the qualities and conditions of the lords of Demonland, and of the embassy sent unto them, by King Gorisex, and of the answer thereto. The eastern stars were paling to the dawn as Lessingham followed his conductor along the grass walk between the shadowy ranks of Irish yews, that stood like soldiers, mysterious and expectant in the darkness. The grass was bathed in night dew, and great white lilies sleeping in the shadows of the yews loaded the air of that garden with fragrance. Lessingham felt no touch of the ground beneath his feet, and when he stretched out his hand to touch a tree, his hand passed through branch and leaves as though they were unsubstantial as a moonbeam. The little martlet, alighting on his shoulder, laughed in his ear. "Child of earth," she said, "dost think we are here in dreamland?" He answered nothing, and she said, "This is no dream. Thou, first of the children of men, art come to Mercury, where thou and I will journey up and down for a season, to show thee the lands and oceans, the forests, plains, and ancient mountains, cities and palaces of this world, Mercury and the doings of them that dwell therein. But here thou canst not handle aught, neither make the folk ware of thee, not though thou shout thy throat hoarse. For thou and I walk here impalpable and invisible, as it were two dreams walking." They were now on the marble steps which led from the yew walk to the terrace opposite the great gate of the castle. "No need to unbar gates to thee and me," said the martlet, as they passed beneath the darkness of that ancient portal, carved with strange devices, and clean through the massy timbers of the bolted gate thickly riveted with silver, into the inner court. "Go we into the lofty presence chamber, and there tarry a while. Morning is kindling the upper air, and folk will soon be stirring in the castle, for they lie not long abed when day begins in Demonland. For be it known to thee, O Earthborn, that this land is Demonland, and this castle the castle of Lord Juss, and this day now dawning his birthday, when the demons hold high festival in Juss's castle, to do honour unto him and to his brethren, Spitfire and Goldry Brusco, and these and their fathers before them bear rule from time immemorial in Demonland, and have the lordship over all the demons." She spoke, and the first low beams of the sun smote javelin-like through the eastern windows, and the freshness of morning breathed and shimmered in that lofty chamber, chasing the blue and dusky shades of departed night to the corners and recesses, and to the rafters of the vaulted roof. Surely no potentate of earth, not Croesus, not the great king, not Minos in his royal palace in Crete, not all the pharaohs, not Queen Semiramis, nor all the kings of Babylon and Nineveh had ever a throne-room to compare in glory with that high presence chamber of the lords of Demonland. Its walls and pillars were of snow-white marble, every vein whereof was set with small gems, rubies, corals, garnets, and pink topaz. 7 pillars on either side bore up the shadowy vault of the roof. The roof tree and the beams were of gold, curiously carved, the roof itself of mother of pearl. A side aisle ran behind each row of pillars, and 7 paintings on the western side faced 7 spacious windows on the east. At the end of the hall, upon a dais, stood 3 high seats, the arms of each composed of 2 hippogriffs wrought in gold, with wings spread, and the legs of the seats, the legs of the hippogriffs, but the body of each high seat was a single jewel of monstrous size, the left-hand seat a black opal, a sparkle with steel-blue fire, the next a fire opal, as it were a burning coal, the third seat an alexandrite, purple like wine by night, but deep-sea green by day. 10 more pillars stood in semicircle behind the high seats, bearing up above them and the dais a canopy of gold. The benches that ran from end to end of the lofty chamber were of cedar, inlaid with coral and ivory, and so were the tables that stood before the benches. The floor of the chamber was tessellated of marble and green tourmaline, and on every square of tourmaline was carven the image of a fish, as the dolphin, the conger, the catfish, the salmon, the tunny, the squid, and other wonders of the deep. Hangings of tapestry were behind the high seats, worked with flowers, snake's head, snapdragon, dragon mouth, and their kind, and on the dado below the windows were sculptures of birds and beasts and creeping things. But a great wonder of this chamber, and a marvel to behold, was how the capital of every one of the 24 pillars was hewn from a single precious stone, carved by the hand of some sculptor of long ago into the living form of a monster. Here was a harpy with screaming mouth, so wondrously cut in ochre-tinted jade it was a marvel to hear no scream from her. Here in wine-yellow topaz a flying fire-drake, there a cockatrice made of a single ruby, there a star sapphire, the colour of moonlight, cut for a cyclops, so that the rays of the star trembled from his single eye, salamanders, mermaids, chimaeras, wild men of the woods, leviathans, all hewn from faultless gems, thrice the bulk of a big man's body, velvet dark sapphires, chrysolite, beryl, amethyst, and the yellow zircon, that is like transparent gold. To give light to the presence chamber were 7 escarbuncles, great as pumpkins, hung in order down the length of it, and 9 fair moonstones standing in order on silver pedestals between the pillars on the dais. These jewels, drinking in the sunshine by day, gave it forth during the hours of darkness in a radiance of pink light and a soft effulgence as of moonbeams. And yet another marvel. The nether side of the canopy over the high seats was encrusted with lapis lazuli, and in that feigned dome of heaven burned the 12 signs of the zodiac, every star a diamond that shone with its own light. Folk now began to be astir in the castle, and there came a score of serving men into the presence chamber with brooms and brushes, cloths and leathers, to sweep and garnish it, and burnish the gold and jewels of the chamber. Lissom they were, and sprightly of gait, of fresh complexion and fair-haired. Horns grew on their heads. When their tasks were accomplished, they departed, and the presence began to fill with guests. A joy it was to see such a shifting maze of velvets, furs, curious needleworks, and cloth of tissue, tiffanies, laces, ruffs, goodly chains and carcanets of gold, such glitter of jewels and weapons, such nodding of the plumes the demons wore in their hair, half veiling the horns that grew upon their heads. Some were sitting on the benches or leaning on the polished tables, some walking forth and back upon the shining floor. Here and there were women among them, women so fair one had said, "It is surely white-armed Helen." This one, this Arcadian Atalanta, this Phryne, that stood to Praxiteles for Aphrodite's picture, this Thais, for whom great Alexander to pleasure her fantasy did burn Persepolis like a candle, this she that was rapt by the dark god from the flowering fields of Enna, to be queen for ever among the dead that be departed. Now came a stir near the stately doorway, and Lessingham beheld a demon of burly frame and noble port, richly attired. His face was ruddy and somewhat freckled, his forehead wide, his eyes calm and blue like the sea. His beard, thick and tawny, was parted and brushed back and upwards on either side. "Tell me, my little martlet," said Lessingham, "is this Lord Juss?" "This is not Lord Juss," answered the martlet, "nor aught so worshipful as he. The lord thou seest is Vole, who dwelleth under Cartazza by the salt sea. A great sea captain is he, and one that did service to the cause of Demonland. and of the whole world besides, in the late wars against the ghouls. But cast thine eyes again towards the door, where one standeth amid a knot of friends, tall and somewhat stooping, in a corselet of silver, and a cloak of old brocaded silk, coloured like tarnished gold, something like to Vole in feature, but swarthy, and with bristling black mustachios. "I see him," said Lessingham. "This then is Lord Juss?" "Not so," said the martlet. "'Tis but Viz, brother to Vole. He is wealthiest in goods of all the demons, save the three brethren only, and Lord Brandoch Daha." "And who is this?" asked Lessingham, pointing to one of light and brisk step and humorous eye, who in that moment met Vol and engaged him in converse apart. Handsome of face he was, albeit somewhat long-nosed and sharp-nosed, keen and hard and filled with life and the joy of it. "Here thou beholdest," answered she, "Lord Zig, the far-famed tamer of horses. Well loved is he among the demons, for he is merry of mood, and a mighty man of his hands withal, when he leadeth his horsemen against the enemy." Vol threw up his beard and laughed a great laugh at some jest that Zig whispered in his ear, and Lessingham leaned forward into the hall, if haply he might catch what was said. The hum of talk drowned the words, but leaning forward, Lessingham saw where the arras curtains behind the dais parted for a moment, and one of princely bearing advanced past the high seats down the body of the hall. His gait was delicate, as of some lithe beast of prey newly wakened out of slumber, and he greeted with lazy grace the many friends who hailed his entrance. Very tall was that lord, and slender of build, like a girl. His tunic was of silk coloured like the wild rose, and embroidered in gold with representations of flowers and thunderbolts. Jewels glittered on his left hand, and on the golden bracelets on his arms, and on the fillet twined among the golden curls of his hair. Set with plumes of the king bird of paradise, his horns were dyed with saffron and inlaid with filigree work of gold. His buskins were laced with gold, and from his belt hung a sword, narrow of blade and keen, the hilt rough with beryls and black diamonds. Strangely light and delicate was his frame, and seeming, yet with a sense of slumbering power beneath, as the delicate peak of a snow mountain seen afar in the low red rays of morning. His face was beautiful to look upon, and softly coloured like a girl's face, and his expression one of gentle melancholy, mixed with some disdain, but fiery glints awoke at intervals in his eyes, and the lines of swift determination hovered round the mouth below his curled mustachios. "At last," murmured Lessingham, "at last, Lord Juss." "Little art thou to blame," said the martlet, "for this misprision, for scarce could a lordlier sight have joyed thine eyes. Yet is this not Juss, but Lord Brandoch Daha, to whom all demon land west of Shalgreth and Stropodon oweth allegiance, the rich vineyards of Crothering, the broad pasture lands of Fayuzi, and all the western islands and their crag-bound fastnesses. Think not, because he affecteth silks and jewels like a queen, and carrieth himself light and dainty as a silver birch tree on the mountain, that his hand is light or his courage doubtful in war. For years was he held for the third best man, at arms in all Mercury, along with these Goldry Blasco and Goris the Dent, of Witchland. And Goris he slew 9 summers back in single combat, when the witches harried in Goblinland, and Brandoch Daha led 504 demons to succour Gaslark, the king of that country. And now can none surpass Lord Brandoch Daha in feats of arms, save, perchance, Goldry alone. Yet, lo, she said, as a sweet and wild music stole on the ear, and the guests turned towards the dais and the hangings parted, at last the triple lordship of Demonland. Strike softly, music, smile, fates, on this festal day. Joy and safe days shine for this world and demon land. Turn thy gaze first on him who walks in majesty in the midst, his tunic of olive green velvet ornamented with devices of hidden meaning in thread of gold and beads of chrysolite. Mark how the buskins, clasping his stalwart calves, glitter with gold and amber. Mark the dusky cloak streamed with gold and lined with blood-red silk, a charmed cloak made by the sylphs in forgotten days, bringing good hap to the wearer. So he be true of heart and no dastard. Mark him that weareth it, his sweet dark countenance, the violet fire in his eyes, the sombre warmth of his smile, like autumn woods in late sunshine. This is Lord Jus, lord of this age, remembering castle, than whom none hath more worship in wide demon land. Somewhat he knoweth of art, magical, yet useth not that art, for it sappeth the life and strength. Nor is it held worthy that a demon should put trust in that art, but rather in his own might and main. Now turn thine eyes to him that leaneth on Jus's left arm, shorter, but mayhap sturdier than he, apparelled in black silk that shimmers with gold as he moveth, and crowned with black eagle's feathers among his horns and yellow hair. His face is wild and keen like a sea-eagle's, and from his bristling brows the eyes dart glances sharp as a glancing spear. A faint flame, pallid like the fire of a will-o'-the-wisp, breathes ever and anon from his distended nostrils. This is Lord Spitfire, impetuous in war. Last, behold on Jus's right hand, yon lord that bulks mighty as Hercules, yet steppeth lightly as a heifer. The thews and sinews of his great limbs ripple as he moves beneath a skin whiter than ivory. His cloak of cloth of gold is heavy with jewels. His tunic of black senderline hath great hearts worked thereon in rubies and red silk thread. Slung from his shoulders clanks a two-handed sword, the pommel, a huge star ruby carven in the image of a heart, for the heart is his sign and symbol. This is that sword forged by the elves, wherewith he slew the sea monster, as thou mayest see in the painting on the wall. Noble is he of countenance, most like to his brother Jus, but darker brown of hair, and ruddier of hue, and bigger of cheekbone. Look well on him, for never shall thine eyes behold a greater champion than the Lord Goldry Blasco, captain of the hosts of Demon Land. Now when the greetings were done, and the strains of the lutes and recorders sighed and lost themselves in the shadowy vault of the roof, the cupbearers did fill great gems, made in form of cups with ancient wine, and the demons caroused to Lord Jus deep draughts in honour of this day of his nativity. And now they were ready to set forth by twos and threes into the parks and pleasaunces, some to take their pleasure about the fair gardens and fish-ponds, some to hunt wild game among the wooded hills, some to disport themselves at quoits or tennis, or riding at the ring, or martial exercises, that so they might spend the livelong day as befitteth high holiday, in pleasure and action without care, and thereafter revel in the lofty presence, chamber till night grew old with eating and drinking and all delight. But as they were upon going forth, a trumpet was sounded without, 3 strident blasts. "What kill joy have we here?" said Spitfire. "The trumpet soundeth only for travellers from the outlands. I feel it in my bones. Some rascal is come to Galing, one that bringeth ill hap in his pocket and a shadow athwart the sun on this our day of festival." "Speak no word of ill omen," answered Jus. "Whosoe'er it be, we will straight dispatch his business, and so fall to pleasure indeed. Some, run to the gate and bring him in." The serving man hastened and returned, saying, "Lord, it is an ambassador from Witchland and his train. Their ship made land at Lookinghaven at nightfall. They slept on board, and your soldiers gave them escort to Galing at break of day. He craveth present audience. From which land, huh? Said Just. Such smokes use ever to go before the fire. Shall's bid the fellow, said Spitfire, wait on our pleasure. It is pity such should poison our gladness. Goldry laughed and said, Whom hath he sent us? Laxus, think you, to make his peace with us again, for that vile part of his practised against us off Cartadza, detestably falsifying his word he had given us? Jus said to the serving man, Thou sawest the ambassador. Who is he? Lord, answered he, his face was strange to me. He is little of stature, and, by your highness' leave, the most unlike to a great lord of which land that ever I saw, and, by your leave, for all the marvellous rich and sumptuous coat a weareth, he is very like a false jewel in a rich casing. Well, said Jus, a sour draught sweetens not in the waiting. Call we in the ambassador. Lord Jus sat in the high seat midmost of the dais, with Goldry on his right in the seat of black opal, and on his left Spitfire, throned on the Alexandrite. On the dais sat likewise those other lords of Demonland, and the guests of lower degree thronged the benches and the polished tables as the wide doors opened on their silver hinges. And the ambassador with pomp and ceremony paced up the shining floor of marble and green tourmaline. Why, what a beastly fellow is this? Said Lord Goldry in his brother's ear. His hairy hands reached down to his knees, a shuffleth in his walk like a hobbled jackass. I like not the dirty face of the ambassador, said Lord Zig. His nose sitteth flat on the face of him, as it were a dab of clay, and I can see pat up his nostrils a summer day's journey into his head. If's upper lip bespeak him, not a rare spouter of rank fustian, perdition, catch me. Were it a finger's breadth longer, might tuck it into his collar to keep his chin warm of a winter's night. I like not the smell of the ambassador, said Lord Brandoch Daha, and he called for censers and sprinklers of lavender and rose-water to purify the chamber, and let open the crystal windows that the breezes of heaven might enter and make all sweet. So the ambassador walked up the shining floor and stood before the lords of Demonland that sat upon the high seats between the golden hippogriffs. He was robed in a long mantle of scarlet velvet lined with ermine, with crabs, woodlice, and centipedes worked thereon in golden thread. His head was covered with a black velvet cap, with a peacock's feather fastened with a brooch of silver. Supported by his train-bearers and attendants, and leaning on his golden staff, he with raucous accent delivered his mission. Jus, Goldry, and Spitfire, and ye other demons, I come before you as the ambassador of Goris Doublet X Ineth, most glorious king of Witchland, lord and great duke of Butany and Estramarine, commander of Shulan, Thramne, Mingos, and Permio, and high warden of the Esimotian marches, great duke of Trace, king paramount of Bestria and Nevria and Prince of Ar, great lord over the country of Ogedia, Moltreani, and of Baltari and Toribia, and lord of many other countries, most glorious and most great, whose power and glory is over all the world, and whose name shall endure for all generations. And first I bid you be bound by that reverence for my sacred office of envoy from the king, which is accorded by all people and potentates, save such as be utterly barbarous to ambassadors and envoys. Speak and fear not, answered Jus. Thou hast mine oath, and that hath never been forsworn to witch or other barbarian. The ambassador shot out his lips in an O, and threatened with his head, then grinned, laying bare his sharp and misshapen teeth, and proceeded, Thus saith King Goris, great and glorious, and he charges me to deliver it to you. neither adding any word nor taking away, I have it in mind that no ceremony of homage or fealty hath been performed before me by the dwellers in my province of Demonland. As the rustling of dry leaves strewn in a flagged court when a sudden wind striketh them, there went a stir among the guests. Nor might the Lord Spitfire contain his wrath, but springing up and clapping hand to sword hilt, as minded to do a hurt to the ambassador, "Province," he cried, "are not the demons a free people? And is it to be endured that Witchland should commission this slave to cast insults in our teeth, and this in our own castle?" A murmur went about the hall, and here and there folk rose from their seats. The ambassador drew down his head between his shoulders like a tortoise, baring his teeth and blinking with his small eyes. But Lord Brandoch Daha, lightly laying his hand on Spitfire's arm, said, "The ambassador hath not ended his message, cousin, and thou hast frightened him. Have patience, and spoil not the comedy. We shall not lack words to answer King Goris, no, nor swords, if he must have them. But it shall not be said of us, of Demonland, that it needeth but a boorish message to turn us from our ancient courtesy toward ambassadors and heralds." So spake Lord Brandoch Daha, in lazy half-mocking tone, as one who but idly returneth the ball of conversation, yet clearly, so that all might hear. And therewith the murmurs died down, and Spitfire said, "I am tame. Say thine errand freely, and imagine not that we shall hold thee answerable for aught thou sayest, but him that sent thee." "Whose humble mouthpiece I only am," said the ambassador, somewhat gathering courage, "and who, saving your reverence, lacketh not the will nor the power to take revenge for any outrage done upon his servants. Thus saith the king, I therefore summon and command you, Jus, Spitfire, and Goldry Blusco, to make haste and come to me in Witchland, in my fortress of Kaka, and there dutifully kiss my toe, in witness before all the world that I am your lord and king, and rightful overlord of all Demonland." Gravely and without gesture, Lord Jus hearkened to the ambassador, leaning back in his high seat with either arm thrown athwart the arched neck of a hippogriff. Goldry, smiling scornfully, toyed with the hilt of his great sword. Spitfire sat strained and glowering, the sparks crackling at his nostrils. "Thou hast delivered all," said Jus. "All," answered the ambassador. "Thou shalt have thine answer," said Jus. "While we take rede thereon, eat and drink." And he beckoned the cupbearer to pour out bright wine for the ambassador. But the ambassador excused himself, saying that he was not athirst, and that he had store of food and wine aboard of his ship, which should suffice his needs and those of his following. Then said Lord Spitfire, "No marvel, though the spawn of Witchland fear venom in the cup. They who work commonly such villainy against their enemies, as witness Reseda of Goblinland, whom Corsus murthered with a poisonous draught, shake still in the knees, lest themselves be so entertained to their destruction." And snatching the cup, he quaffed it to the dregs and dashed it on the marble floor before the ambassador, so that it was shivered into pieces. And the lords of Demonland rose up and withdrew behind the flowery hangings into a chamber apart, to determine of their answer to the message sent unto them by King Goris of Witchland. When they were private together, Spitfire spake and said, "Is it to be borne that the king should put such shame and mockery upon us? Could not at the least have made a son of Corund, or of Corsus his ambassador to bring us his defiance, instead of this filthiest of his domestics, a gibbering dwarf, fit only to make them gab and game at their tippling bouts when they be 3 parts senseless with boozing?" Lord Jus smiled somewhat scornfully. "With wisdom," he said, "and with foresight hath Witchland made choice of his time to move against us. knowing that 33 of our well-built ships are sunken in Cartazza, sound in the battle with the ghouls, and but 14 remain to us. Now that the ghouls are slain, every soul, and utterly abolished from this world, and so the great curse and peril of all this world ended by the sword and great valor of Demonland alone, now seemeth the happy moment unto these late mouth-friends to fall upon us. For have not the witches a strong fleet of ships, since their whole fleet fled at the beginning of their fight with us against the ghouls, leaving us to bear the burden? And now are they minded for this new treason, to set upon us traitorously and suddenly in this disadvantage? For the king well judgeth we can carry no army to Witchland, nor do aught in his despite, but must be long months our shipbuilding. And doubt not he holdeth an armament ready aboard a Tenemos to sail hither, if he get the answer he knoweth we shall send him. Sit we at ease then, said Goldry, sharpening our swords, and let him ship his armies across the salt sea. Not a witch shall land in Demonland, but shall leave here his blood and bones, to make fat our cornfields and our vineyards. Rather, said Spitfire, apprehend this rascal, and put to sea today with the 14 ships left us. We can surprise Witchland in his strong place of Khaki, sack it, and give him to the crows to peck at, or ever he is well awake to the swiftness of our answer. That is my counsel. Nay, said Jos, we shall not take him sleeping. Be certain that his ships are ready and watching in the Witchland seas, prepared against any rash onset. It were folly to set our neck in the noose. A little glory to Demonland to await his coming. This, then, is my reader. I will bid Goris to the duello, and make offer to him to let lie on the fortune thereof the decision of this quarrel. A good rede, if it might be fulfilled, said Goldry, but never will he dare to stand with weapons in single combat gainst thee or gainst any of us. Nevertheless, the thing shall be brought about. Is not Goris a mighty wrestler, and hath he not in his palace in Khaki the skulls and bones of 99 great champions whom he hath vanquished and slain in that exercise? Puffed up beyond measure is he in his own conceit, and folk say it is a grief to him that none hath been found this long while that durst wrestle with him. And woefully he pineth for the 100th, he shall wrestle afore with me. Now this seemed good to them all. So when they had talked on it a while and concluded what they would do, glad of heart, the lords of Demonland turned them back to the lofty presence chamber. And there Lord Just spake and said, Demons, ye have heard the words which the king of Witchland, in the overweening pride and shamelessness of his heart, hath spoken unto us by the mouth of this ambassador. Now this is our answer which my brother shall give, the Lord Goldry Blusco, and we charge thee, O ambassador, to deliver it truly, neither adding any word nor taking away. And the Lord Goldry spake, We, the lords of Demonland, do utterly scorn thee, Goris the Exine, for the greatest of dastards, in that thou basely fleddest and forsookest us, thy sworn confederates, in the sea battle against the ghouls. Our swords, which in that battle ended so great a curse and peril to all this world, are not bent nor broken. They shall be sheathed in the bowels of thee and thy minions, coursers to wit, and Corrund and their sons and Corineus, and what other evildoers harbour in waterish Witchland, sooner than one little sea-pink growing on the cliffs of Demonland shall do thee obeisance. But that thou mayest, if so thou wilt, feel our power somewhat, I, Lord Goldry Blusco, make thee this offer, that thou and I do match ourselves singly each against other, to wrestle 3 falls at the court of the Red Foliot. Who inclineth neither to our side nor to thine in this quarrel? And we will bind ourselves by mighty oaths to these conditions, that if I overcome thee, the demons shall leave you of Witchland in peace, and ye them, and the witches shall forswear for ever their impudent claims on Demonland. But if thou, goddess, win the day, then hast thou the glory of that victory, and withal full liberty to thrust thy claims upon us with the sword. So spake the Lord Goldry Blusco, standing in great pride and splendor beneath the starry canopy, and scowling terribly on the ambassador from Witchland, so that the ambassador was abashed, and his knees smote together. And Goldry called his scribe, and made him write the message for Goris the king, in great characters on a roll of parchment, and the lords of Demonland sealed it with their seals, and gave it to the ambassador. The ambassador took it, and made haste to depart. But when he was come to the stately doorway of the presence chamber, being near the door and amongst his attendants, and away from the lords of Demonland, he plucked up heart a little, and turned and said, Rashly and to thy certain undoing, O Goldry Blusco, hast thou bidden our lord the king to contend with thee in wrestling. For be thou never so mighty of limb, yet hath he overthrown as mighty. And he wrestleth not for sport, but will surely work thy life's decay, and keep the dead bones of thee with the bones of the 99 champions whom he hath heretofore laid low in that exercise. Therewith, because Goldry and the other lords scowled upon him terribly, and the guests near the door fell to hooting and reviling of the witches, the ambassador went forth hastily down the shining stairs and across the court, as one who fleeth along a lane on a dark and windy night, daring not to turn his head, lest his eye behold some fearsome thing prepared to clasp him. So speeding, he was fain to catch up about his knees the folds of his velvet cloak richly worked with crabs and creeping things, and huge whooping and laughter went up among the common lag of people without, to behold his long and nerveless tail, thus bared to their unfriendly gaze, insomuch that they fell to shouting with one accord, Though his mouth be foul, he hath a fair tail. Saw ye not his tail? Hurrah for Goris, who hath sent us a monkey for his ambassador. And with jibe and unmannerly yell, the crowd hung lovingly upon the ambassador and his train all the way down from Galing Castle to the quays, so that it was like a sweet home coming to him, to come on board his well-built ship and have her rowed amain out of Lookinghaven. So when they had rounded Lookinghavenness and were free of the land, they hoisted sail and voyaged before a favouring breeze eastward over the teeming deep to Witchland. The wrestling for Demonland of the prognostics which troubled Lord Crow concerning the meeting between the King of Witchland and the Lord Goldry Blusco, and how they met, and of the issue of that wrestling. How could I have fallen asleep? Cried Lessingham. Where is the castle of the demons? And how did we leave the great presence chamber where they saw the ambassador? For he stood on rolling uplands that leaned to the sea, treeless on every side as far as the eye might reach, and on 3 sides shimmered the sea, kissed by the sun and roughened by the salt-glad wind that charged over the downs, charioting clouds without number through the illimitable heights of air. The little black martlet answered him, My hippogriff travelleth as well in time as in space. Days and weeks have been left behind by us, in what seemeth to thee but the twinkling of an eye. And thou standest in the Foliot Isles, a land happy under the mild regiment of a peaceful prince, on the day appointed by King Goris to wrestle with Lord Goldry Blusco. Terrible must be the wrestling betwixt 2 such champions, and dark the issue thereof. And my heart is afraid for Goldry Blusco, big and strong though he be, and unconquered in war, for there hath not arisen in all the ages such a wrestler as this. Goris, and strong he is, and hard and unwearying, and skilled in every art of attack and defence, and subtle withal, and cruel, and fell like a serpent. Where they stood, the down was cut by a combe that descended to the sea, and overhanging the combe was the palace of the red foliot, rambling and low, with many little towers and battlements, built of stones hewn from the wall of the combe, so that it was hard from a distance to discern what was palace and what native rock. Behind the palace stretched a meadow, flat and smooth, carpeted with the close, wiry turf of the downs. At either end of the meadow were booths set up, to the north the booths of them of Witchland, and to the south the booths of the demons. In the midst of the meadow was a space marked out with withes, 60 paces either way, for the wrestling ground. Only the birds of the air and the sea wind were abroad as then, save those that walked armed before the witches' booths, 6 in company, harnessed as for battle in burnies of shining bronze, with greaves and shields of bronze and helms that glanced in the sun. 5 were proper, slender youths, the eldest of whom had not yet beard full grown, black-browed and great of jaw. The 6th, huge as a neat, topped them by half a head. Age had flecked with grey the beard that spread over his big chest, to his belt stiffened with studs of iron, but the vigour of youth was in his glance, and in his voice, and in the tread of his foot, and in his fist, so lightly handling his burly spear. Behold, wonder, and lament, said the martlet, that the innocent eye of day should be enforced still to look upon the children of night everlasting, Corrand of Witchland and his cursed sons. Lessingham thought, a most fiery politician is my little martlet, damned fiends and angels, and nothing betwixt for her. But I'll dance to none of their tunes, but wait for these things unfolding. So walked those back and forth as caged lions before the witches' booths, until Corrand halted, and leaning on his spear, said to one of his sons, Go in and seek out Grow, that I may speak with him. And the son of Corrand went, and returned anon with Lord Grow, that came with furtive step, yet goodly and fair to behold. The nose of him was hooked like a sickle, and his eyes great and fair like the eyes of an ox, inscrutable as they. Lean and spare was his frame. Pale was his face, and pale his delicate hands, and his long black beard was tightly curled and bright as the coat of a black retriever. Corrand said, How is it with the king? Grow answered him, He chafeth to be at it, and to pass away the time he playeth at dice with Corinius, and the luck goeth against the king. What makest thou of that? asked Corrand. And Grow said, The fortune of the dice jumpeth not commonly with the fortune of war. Corrand grunted in his beard, and laying his large hand on Lord Grow's shoulder, Speak to me a little apart, he said. And when they were private, darken not counsel, said Corrand, to me and my sons. Have I not these 4 years past been as a brother unto thee, and wilt thou still be secret toward us? But Grow smiled a sad smile, and said, Why should we by words of ill omen strike yet another blow where the tree tottereth? Corrand groaned. Omens, said he, increase upon us from that time forth, when the king accepted the challenge, evilly, and flatly against thy counsel and mine, and the counsel of all the great ones in the land. Surely the gods have made him fey, having ordained his destruction, and are humbling before these demons. And he said, Omens thicken upon us, O Grow. First, the night raven that went widdershins round about the palace of Karki. That night, when the king accepted this challenge, and we were all drunken with wine, after our great feasting and surfeiting in his halls. Next, the stumbling of the king, when as he went upon the poop of the long ship which bare us on this voyage to these islands. Next, the squint-eyed cupbearer that poured out unto us yesternight, and throughout the devilish pride and bragging humour of the king. No more, he is fey, and the dice fall against him. Grow spake and said, O Corrand, I will not hide it from thee that my heart is heavy as thy heart under shadow of ill to be. For as I lay sleeping betwixt the strokes of night, a dream of the night stood by my bed, and beheld me with a glance so fell, that I was all adrad and quaking with fear. And it seemed to me that the dream smote the roof above my bed, and the roof opened and disclosed the outer dark, and in the dark travelled a bearded star, and the night was quick with fiery signs. And blood was on the roof, and great gouts of blood on the walls and on the cornice of my bed. And the dream screeched like the screech-owl, and cried, Witchland from thy hand, O king! And methought the whole world was lighted in a low, and with a great cry I awoke out of the dream. Thou art wise, said Corrand, and belike the dream was a true dream, sent thee through the gate of horn, and belike it forebodeth events great and evil for the king and for Witchland. Grow said, Disclose it not to the others, for none can strive with fate and gain the victory, and it would but cast down their hearts. But it is fitting we be ready against evil hap. If, which yet may the gods forfend, ill come of this wrestling bout, fail not every one of you ere you act on any enterprise to take counsel of me. Bear is back without brother behind it. Together must we do that we do. Thou hast my firm assurance, own't, said Corrand. Now began a great company to come forth from the palace, and take their stand on either side of the wrestling ground. The red foliot sate in his car of polished ebony, drawn by 6 black horses with flowing manes and tails. Before him went his musicians, pipers, and minstrels doing their craft, and behind him 50 spearmen, weighed down with armour and ponderous shields that covered them from chin to toe. Their armour was stained with madder, in such wise that they seemed bathed in blood. Mild to look on was the red folio, yet kingly. His skin was scarlet, like the head of the green woodpecker. He wore a diadem of silver, and robes of scarlet trimmed with black fur. So when the foliots were assembled, one stood forth with a horn at the command of the red folio, and blew 3 blasts. Therewith came forth from their booths the lords of Demonland and their men-at-arms, Juice, Goldry, Spitfire, and Brandoch Daha, all armed as for battle save Goldry, who was muffled in a cloak of cloth of gold, with great hearts worked thereon in red silk thread. And from their booths in turn came the lords of Witchland, all armed, and their fighting men, and little love there was in the glances they and the demons cast upon each other. In the midst stalked the king, his great limbs muffled like Goldry's, in a cloak, and it was of black silk, lined with black bearskin, and ornamented with crabs, worked in diamonds. The crown of Witchland, fashioned like a hideous crab, and encrusted with jewels so thickly that none might discern the iron whereof it was framed, weighed on his beetling brow. His beard was black and bristly, spade-shaped and thick, his hair close-cropped. His upper lip was shaved, displaying his sneering mouth, and from the darkness below his eyebrows looked forth eyes that showed a green light, like those of a wolf. Corrand walked at the king's left elbow, his giant frame an inch less in stature than the king. Corinius went on the right, wearing a rich cloak of sky-blue tissue over his shining armour. Tall and soldier-like was Corinius, and young and goodly to look upon, with swaggering gait and insolent eye, thick-lipped withal, and somewhat heavy of feature, and the sun shone brightly on his shaven jowl. Now the red folio let sound the horn again, and, standing in his ebony car, he read out the conditions, as thus: O Goris the Seventh, most glorious king of Witchland, and O Lord Goldry Blusco, captain of the hosts of Demonland, it is compact betwixt you, and made fast by mighty oaths, whereof I, the Red Foliot, am keeper, that ye shall wrestle 3 falls together on these conditions, namely, that if Garish the king be victorious, then hath he that glory, and with all full liberty to enforce with the sword his claims of lordship over many mountain Demonland. But if victory fall to the Lord Goldry Blusco, then shall the demons let the witches abide in peace, and they them, and the witches shall forswear for ever their claims of lordship over the demons. And you, O king, and you, O Goldry Blusco, are likewise bound by oath to wrestle fairly, and to abide by the ruling of me, the Red Folio, whom ye are content to choose as your umpire. And I do swear to judge justly between you. And the laws of your wrestling are that neither shall strangle his adversary with his hands, nor bite him, nor claw, nor scratch his flesh, nor poach out his eyes, nor smite him with his fists, nor do any other unfair thing against him. But in all other respects ye shall wrestle freely together. And he that shall be brought to earth with hip or shoulder shall be accounted fallen. The Red Folio said, Have I spoken well, O king? And do you swear to these conditions? The king said. I swear. The Red Foliot asked in like manner, Dost thou swear to these conditions, O Lord Goldry Blusco? And Goldry answered him, I swear. Without more ado, the king stepped into the wrestling ground on his side, and Goldry Blusco on his, and they cast aside their rich mantles, and stood forth naked for the wrestling. And folk stood silent for admiration of the thews and sinews of those twain, doubting which were mightier of build, and likelier to gain the victory. The king stood taller by a little, and was longer in the arm than Goldry. But the great frame of Goldry showed excellent proportions, each part wedded to each as in the body of a god. And if either were brawnier of chest, it was he, and he was thicker of neck than the king. Now the king mocked Goldry, saying, Rebellious hound, it is fit that I make demonstration unto thee, and unto these foliots and demons that witness our meeting, that I am thy king and lord, not by virtue only of this, my crown of Witchland, which I thus put by for an hour, but even by the power of my body over thine, and by my might and main. Be satisfied that I will not have done with thee until I have taken away thy life, and sent thy soul squealing bodiless into the unknown. And thy skull and thy marrow bones will I have away to Carcha, to my palace, to be a token unto all the world that I have been the bane of 100th great champion by my wrestling, and thou not least among them, that I have slain in that exercise. Thereafter, when I have eaten and drunken, and made merry in my royal palace at Carcha, I will sail with my armies over the teeming deep to many-mountained Demonland. And it shall be my footstool, and these other demons the slaves of me, yea, and the slaves of my slaves. But the Lord Goldry Blusco laughed lightly and said to the Red Foliot, O Red Foliot, I am not come hither to contend with the king of Witchland in windy railing, but to match my strength against his, sinew against sinew. Now they stood ready, and the Red Folio made a sign with his hand, and the cymbals clashed for the first bout. At the clash, the two champions advanced and clasped one another with their strong arms, each with his right arm below and left arm above the other's shoulder, until the flesh shrank beneath the might of their arms that were as brazen bands. They swayed a little, this way and that, as great trees swaying in a storm, their legs planted firmly so that they seemed to grow out of the ground like the trunks of oak trees. Nor did either yield ground to other, nor might either win a master hold upon his enemy, So swayed they back and forth for a long time, breathing heavily. And now Goldry, gathering his strength, gat. The king lifted a little from the ground, and was minded to swing him round and so dash him to earth. But the king, in that moment when he found himself lifted, leaned forward mightily, and smote his heel swiftly round Goldry's leg on the outside, striking him behind, and a little above the ankle, in such wise that Goldry was fain to loosen his hold on the king, and greatly folk marvelled that he was able in that plight to save himself from being thrown backward by the king. So they gripped again until red wheals rose on their backs and shoulders by reason of the grievous clasping of their arms. And the king, on a sudden, twisted his body sideways, with his left side turned from Goldry, and catching with his leg Goldry's leg on the inside below the great muscle of the calf, and hugging him yet closer, he lurched mightily against him, striving to pull Goldry backward, and so fall upon him and crush him as they fell to earth. But Goldry leaned violently forward, ever tightening his hold on the king, and so violently bare he forward in his strength that the king was balked of his design. And clutched together they fell both to earth side by side with a heavy crash, and lay bemused while one might count 60. The red folio proclaimed them even in this bout, and each returned to his fellows to take breath and rest for a space. Now, while they rested, a fittermouse flew forth from the witchland booths, and went widdershins round the wrestling ground, and so returned silently whence she came. Lord Grow saw her, and his heart waxed heavy within him. He spake to Corrund and said, Needs must that I make trial even at this late hour, if there be not any means to turn the king from further adventuring of himself, ere all be lost. Corrund said, Be it as thou wilt, but it will be in vain. So Grow stood by the king and said, Lord, give over this wrestling. Great of growth and mightier of limb than any that you did overcome aforetime is this demon, yet have you vanquished him. For you did throw him, as we plainly saw, and wrongfully hath the red folio adjudged you evenly matched, because in the throwing of him your majesty's self did fall to earth. Tempt not the fates by another bout. Yours is the victory in this wrestling. And now we, your servants, wait, but your nod to make a sudden onslaught on these demons and slay them, as we may lightly overcome them, taken at unawares. And for the Foliots, they be peaceful, and sheep-like folk, and will be held in awe when we have smitten the demons with the edge of the sword. So may you depart, O king, with pleasure and great honour, and afterward fare to Demon Land and bring it into subjection. The king looked sourly upon Lord Grow and said, Thy counsel is unacceptable and unseasonable. What lieth behind it? Grow answered, There have been omens, O king. And the king said, What omens? Grow answered and said, I will not hide it from you, O my lord the king, that in my sleep about the darkest hour, a dream of the night came to my bed, and beheld me with a glance so fell that the hairs of my head stood up, and pale terror gat hold upon me. And methought the dream smote up the roof above my bed, and the roof yawned to the naked air of the midnight, that laboured with fiery signs, and a bearded star travelling in the houseless dark. And I beheld the roof and the walls one gore of blood, and the dream screeched like the screech-owl, crying, Witchland from thy hand, O king! And therewith the whole world seemed lighted in one flame, and with a shout I awoke, sweating from the dream. But the king rolled his eyes in anger upon Lord Grow, and said, Well am I served and faithfully by such false scheming foxes as thou. It ill fits your turn that I should carry this deed to the end with mine own hand only. And in the blindness of your impudent folly, ye come to me with tales made for scaring of babes, praying me gently to forego my glory, that thou and thy fellows may make yourselves big in the world's eyes by deeds of arms. Grow said, Lord, it is not so. But the king would not hear him, but said, Methinks it is for loyal subjects to seek greatness in the greatness of their king, nor desire to shine of their own brightness. As for this demon, when thou sayest that I have overcome him, thou speakest a gross and impudent lie. In this bout I did but measure myself with him, but thereby know I of a surety that when I put forth my might he will not be able to withstand me, and all ye shall shortly behold how, as one shattereth a stalk of angelica, I will break and shatter the limbs of this goldry brusco. As for thee, false friend, subtle fox, unfaithful servant, this long time am I grown weary of thee, slinking up and down my palace, devising darkly things I know not, thou that art naught akin to witchland, but an outlander, a goblin exile, a serpent warmed in my bosom to my hurt. But these things shall have an end. When I have put down this goldry brusco, then shall I have leisure to put down thee also. And Grow bowed in sorrow of heart before the anger of the king, and held his peace. Now was the horn blown for the second bout, and they stepped into the wrestling ground. At the clashing of the cymbals, the king sprang at Goldry as the panther springeth, and with the rush bare him backward and well nigh forth of the wrestling ground. But when they were carried almost among the demons where they stood to behold the contest, Goldry swung to the left and strove as before to get the king lifted off his feet. But the king foiled him and bent his ponderous weight upon him, so that Goldry's spine was like to have been crushed beneath the murthering violence of the king's arms. Then did the Lord Goldry Blusco show forth his great power as a wrestler, for, even under the murthering clasp of the king, he, by the might that was in the muscles of his brawny chest, shook the king first to the right and then to the left, and the king's hold was loosened, and all his skill and mastery but narrowly saved him from a grievous fall. Nor did Goldry delay, nor ponder how next to make trial of the king, but sudden as the lightning he slackened his hold and turned, and with his back under the king's belly gave a mighty lift, and they that witnessed it stood amazed in expectancy to see the king thrown over Goldry's head. Yet for all his striving might not Goldry get the king lifted clean off the ground. Twice and 3 times he strove, and at each trial he seemed further from his aim, and the king bettered his hold. And at the 4th essay that Goldry made to lift the king over his back and fling him headlong, the king thrust him forward and tripped him from behind, so that Goldry was crawled on his hands and knees. And the king clung to him from behind, and passed his arms round his body beneath the armpits, and so back over the shoulders, being minded to clasp his 2 hands at the back of Goldry's neck. Then said Corrand, The demon is sped already. By this hold hath the king brought to their bane more than 60 famous champions. He delayeth only till his fingers be knit together behind the neck of the accursed demon, to draw the head of him forward until the bones of the neck or the breastbone be bursten asunder. He delayeth over long for my peace, said Grow. The king's breath came out of him in great puffs and grunts as he strained to bring his fingers to meet behind Goldry's neck. Nor was it aught else than the hugeness of his neck and burly chest that saved the Lord Goldry Blusco in that hour from utter destruction. Crawled on his hands and knees, he could nowise escape from the hold of the king, neither lay hold on him in turn. Howbeit, because of the bigness of Goldry's neck and chest, it was impossible for the king to fasten that hold upon him for all his striving. When the king perceived that this was so, and that he but wasted his strength, he said, I will loose my hold on thee, and let thee up, and we will stand again face to face, for I deem it unworthy to grapple on the ground like dogs." So they stood up and wrestled another while in silence. Soon the king made trial once again of the fall, whereby he had sought to throw him in the first bout, twisting suddenly his right side against Goldry, and catching with his leg, Goldry's leg, and therewith leaning against him with main force. And when, as before, Goldry bare forward with great violence, tightening his grip, the king lurched mightily against him, and, being still ill content to have missed his hold that never heretofore had failed him, he thrust his fingers up Goldry's nose in his cruel anger, scratching and clawing at the delicate inner parts of the nostrils in such wise that Goldry was fain to draw back his head. Therewith the king, lurching against him yet more heavily, gat him, thrown a grievous fall on his back, and himself fell atop of him, crushing him and stunning him on the earth. And the red folio proclaimed Goris the king victorious in this bout. Therewithal the king turned him back to his witches, that loudly acclaimed his mastery over Goldry. He said unto Lord Grow, "It is as I have spoken, the testing first, next the bruising, and in the last bout the breaking and killing." And the king looked evilly on Grow. Grow answered him not a word, for his soul was grieved to see blood on the nails and fingers of the king's left hand, and he thought he knew that the king must have been sore bested in this bout, seeing that he must do this beastly deed or ever he might overcome the might of his adversary. But the Lord Goldry Blusco, when he was come to his senses and had gotten him up from that great fall, spake to the red folio in mickle wrath, saying, "This devil hath overcome me by craft, doing that which it is a shame to do, in that he clawed me with his fingers up my nose." The sons of Corund raised an uproar at the words of Goldry, loudly crying that he was the greatest liar and dastard, and all they of Witchland shouted and cursed in like manner. But Goldry shouted in a voice like a brazen trumpet that was plain to hear above the clamour of the witches, "O red foliot, judge now fairly betwixt me and King Goris, as thou art sworn to do. Let him show his fingernails, if there be not blood on them. This fall is void, and I claim that we wrestle it anew." And the lords of Demonland in like manner shouted that this fall should be wrestled anew. Now the red foliot had seen somewhat of what was done, and well was he minded to call the bout void. Yet had he forborne to do this out of fear of King Goris, that had looked upon him with a basilisk's eye, threatening him. And now, while the red folio was troubled in his mind, uncertain between the angry shouts of the witches and the demons, whether safety lay rather with his honour or with truckling to King Goris, the king spake a word to Corinius, who went straightway and standing by the red foliot, spake privily in his ear. And Corinius menaced the red foliot, and said, "Beware, lest thy mind be swayed by the brow-beating of the demons. Rightfully hast thou adjudged the victory in this bout unto our lord the king, and this talk of thrusting of fingers in the nose is but a pretext and a vile imagination of this Goldry Blusco, who, being thrown fairly before thine eyes, and before us all, and perceiving himself unable to stand against the king, now thinketh with his swaggering he can bear it away, and thinketh by cheats and subtleties to avoid defeat. If, against thine own beholding, and the witness of us, and the plighted word of the king, thou art so hardy as to hearken to the guileful persuading of these demons, yet bethink thee that the king hath overborne 99 great champions in this exercise, and this shall be the 100th. And bethink thee too that Witchland lieth nearer to thine isles than Demonland by many days' sailing. Hard shall it be for thee to abide the avenging sword of Witchland, if thou do him despite. and against thy sworn oath as umpire incline wrongfully to his enemies in this dispute. So spake Corineus, and the red foliot was cowed, albeit he believed in his heart that the king had done that whereof Goldry accused him. Yet for terror of the king and of Corineus that stood by and threatened him, he durst not speak his thought, but in sore perplexity gave order for the horn to be blown for the third bout. And it came to pass at the blowing of the horn, that the flittermouse fared forth again from the booths of the witches, and, going widdershins round about the wrestling ground, returned on silent wing whence she came. When the Lord Goldry Blusker understood that the red folio would pay no heed to his accusation, he grew red as blood, a fearsome sight. It was to behold how he swelled in his wrath, and his eyes blazed like disastrous stars at midnight. And being wood with anger, he gnashed his teeth, till the froth stood at his lips and slavered down his chin. Now the cymbals clashed for the onset. Therewith ran Goldry upon the king as one straught of his wits, bellowing as he ran, and gripped him by the right arm with both his hands, one at the wrist and one near the shoulder. And so it was that, before the king might move, Goldry spun round with his back to the king, and by his mickle strength and the strength of the anger that was in him, he heaved the king over his head, hurling him as one hurleth a ponderous spear head foremost to the earth. And the king smote the ground with his head, and the bones of his head and his spine were driven together and smashed, and blood flowed from his ears and nose. With the might of that throw, Goldry's wrath departed from him, and left him strengthless, in such sort that he reeled as he went from the wrestling ground. His brethren, Juss and Spitfire, bare him up on either side, and put his cloak of cloth of gold, worked with red hearts, about his mighty limbs. Meanwhile dismay was fallen upon the witches, to behold their king so caught up on a sudden, and dashed upon the ground, where he lay crumpled in an heap, shattered like the stalk of an hemlock that one breaketh and shattereth. In great agitation the red foliot came down from his car of ebony, and made haste thither where the king was fallen, and the lords of Witchland came likewise thither stricken at heart, and Corund lifted the king in his burly arms. But the king was stone dead. So those sons of Corund made a litter with their spears, and laid the king on the litter, and spread over him his royal mantle of black silk lined with bearskin, and set the crown of Witchland on his head, and without word spoken bare him away to the witches' booths. And the other lords of Witchland without word spoken followed after. The red foliot? Of the entertainment of the witches in the palace of the red foliot, and of the wiles and subtleties of Lord, and how the witches departed by night out of the foliot isles. The red foliot gat him back into his palace, and sat in his high seat. And he sent unto the lords of Witchland and of Demonland that they should come and see him. Nor did they delay, but came straightway, and sat on the long benches, the witches on the eastern side of the hall, and the demons on the west, and their fighting men stood in order on either side behind them. So sat they in the shadowy hall, and the sun declining to the western ocean shone through the high windows of the hall on the polished armour and weapons of the witches. The red folio spake among them and said, A great champion hath been struck to earth this day in fair and equal combat, and according to the solemn oaths whereby ye are bound, and whereof I am the keeper, there is here an end to all unpeace betwixt Witchland and Demonland, and ye of Witchland are to forswear for ever your claims of lordship over the demons. Now for a sealing and making fast of this solemn covenant between you, I see no likelier rede than that ye all join with me here this day in good friendship to Forget your quarrels in drinking of the arvale of King Gorysthek's event, than whom hath reigned none mightier nor more worshipful in all this world, and thereafter depart in peace to your native lands. So spake the red foliot, and the lords of Witchland assented thereto. But Lord Just answered and said, O red foliot, as to the oaths sworn between us and the King of Witchland, thou hast spoken well, nor shall we depart one tittle from the article of our oaths, and the witches may abide in peace for ever. As for us, if, as is clean against their use and nature, they forbear to devise evil against us, for the nature of Witchland was ever as a flea that attacketh a man in the dark. But we will not eat nor drink with the lords of Witchland, who bewrayed and forsook us, their sworn confederates at the sea-fight against the ghouls. Nor we will not drink the arvale of King Gorys, the Exth, who worked a shameful and unlawful slight against my kinsmen this day when they wrestled together. So spake Lord Just, and Corrand whispered, Grow, in the ear, saying, Were't not for the privilege of this respected company, now were the time to set upon them. But Grow said, I prithee yet have patience. This were over hazardous, for the luck goeth against Witchland. Let us rather take them in their beds tonight. Fain would the red foliot turn the demons from their resolve, but without avail, they courteously thanking him for his hospitality, which they said they would enjoy that night in their booths, being minded on the morrow to take to their beaked ship and fare over the unvintaged sea to Demonland. Therewith stood up Lord Just, and with him the Lord Goldry Brusco, that went in all his war gear, his horned helm of gold, and his golden byrnie set with ruby hearts, and bare his two-handed sword, forged by the elves, wherewith he slew the beast out of the sea in days gone by. And Lord Spitfire, that glared upon the lords of Witchland as a falcon glareth, hungering for her prey, and the Lord Brandoch Daha, that looked on them, and chiefly on Corineus, with the eye of contemptuous amusement, playing idly with the jewelled hilt of his sword, until Corineus grew ill at ease beneath his gaze, and shifted this way and that in his seat, scowling back defiance. For all the rich array and goodly port and countenance of Corineus, he seemed but a very boor beside the Lord Brandoch Daha, and dearly did each hate the other. So the lords of Demonland with their fighting men went forth from the hall. The red folio sent after them, and made them in their own booths to be served of great plenty of wine and good and delicate meats, and sent them musicians and a minstrel to gladden them with songs and stories of old time, that they might lack naught of entertainment. But for his other guests he let bear in the massy cups of silver, and the great-eared wine-jars, holding 2 firkins apiece. And he let pour forth to the witches and the foliots, and they drank the cup of memory unto King Gorys W. Teths, slain that day by the hand of Goldry Brusco. Thereafter, when their cups were brimmed anew with foaming wine, the red foliots spake among them and said, O ye lords of Witchland, will you that I speak a dirge in honour of Gorys the king, that the dark reaper hath this day gathered? So when they said yea to this, he called to him his player on the theaubo and his player on the hautboy, and commanded them, saying, Play me a solemn music. And they played softly in the Aeolian mode, a music that was like the wailing of wind through bare branches on a moonless night. And the red folio leaned forth from his high seat and recited this lamentation, I, that in heal was and gladness, am troublet now with great sickness, and feblet with infirmity, Timor, mortis contubat me. Our plaisance here is all vain glory, this false world is but transitory. The flesh is bruckle, the feigned is slee, Timor mortis contubat me. The state of man does change and vary, now sound, now sick, now blithe, now seri, now dancing miri, now like to die. Timor mortis conturbat me. No state in air here standis sicker, as with the wind wavis the wicker, so one is this world's vanity, timor mortis conturbat me. Unto the death goes all estatis princes, prelatis, and potestatis, both rich and poor of all degree. Timor mortis conturbat me. He takis the nichtis in to field enarmet under helm and shield, victor he is at all melee. Timor mortis conturbat me, that strong unmerciful tyrant, takis on the mother's breast so kind, the babe full of benignity. Timor mortis conturbat me. He takis the campion in the stour, the captain closet in the tour, the lady in boor full of beauty. Timor mortis conturbat me. He spares no lord for his puissance, nor clerk for his intelligence. His awful strake may no man flee. Timor mortis conturbat me. Art magicianis and astrologis, rhetheris, logicianis, theologis, theme helpis, no conclusionis, slee, timor mortis conturbat me. In medicine, the most practitionis, leeches, chirurgianis and physicianis, themselves from death may not supplee. Timor mortis conturbat me. When the red folioed had spoken thus far his dirge, he was interrupted by an unseemly brawling betwixt Corineus and one of the sons of Corund. For Corineus, who gave not a fig for music or dirges, but liked well of carding and dicing, had brought forth his dice-box to play with the son of Corund. They played a while to Corineus's great content, for at every throw he won, and the other's purse waxed light. But at this 11th stanza the son of Corund cried out that the dice of Corineus were loaded, and he smote Corineus on his shaven jowl with the dice-box, calling him cheat and mangy rascal, whereupon Corineus drew forth a bodkin to smite him in the neck withal. But some went betwixt them, and with much ado and much struggling and cursing they were parted. And it being shown that the dice were not loaded, the son of Corund was fain to make amends to Corineus, and so were they set at one again. Now was the wine poured forth yet again to the lords of Witchland, and the red folio drank deep unto the glory of that land and the rulers thereof. And he issued command, saying, Let my Kagu come and dance before us, and thereafter my other dancers. For there is no pleasure whereon the foliates do more dearly dote than this pleasure of the dance, and sweet to us it is to behold delightful dancing, be it the stately splendor of the pavane, which progresseth as large clouds at sundown that pass by in splendor, or the graceful alemande, or the fandango, which goeth by degrees from languorous beauty to the swiftness and passion of bacchanals dancing on the high lawns under a summer moon that hangeth in the pine trees, or the joyous maze of the galliard, or the gigui, dear to the foliates. Therefore delay not, but let my Kagu come, that she may dance before us. Therewith hastened the Kagu into the shadowy hall, moving softly and rolling a little in her gait, with her head thrust forward, and a little flurried was she in her bearing, as she darted this way and that, her large and beautiful eyes, mild and timid, that were like liquid gold heated to redness. Somewhat like a heron she was, but stouter, and shorter of leg, and her beak shorter and thicker than the heron's. And so long and delicate was her pale grey plumage that hard it was to say whether it were hair or feathers. So the wind instruments and the lutes and dulcimers played a coranto, and the Kagu tripped up the hall betwixt the long tables, jumping a little, and bowing a little in her step, and keeping excellent time to the music. And when she came near to the dais, where the red folio sat ravished with delight at her dancing, the Kagu lengthened her step, and glided smoothly and slowly forward toward the red folio. And so, gliding, she drew herself up in stately wise, and opened her mouth, and drew back her head till her beak lay tight against her breast, flouncing out her feathers so that they showed like a wide-cut skirt with a crinoline, and the crest that was on her head rose up erect half again, her own height from the ground, and she sailed majestically toward the red folio. On this wise did the Kagu, at every turn that she took in the Caranto, forth and back along the length of the folio's hall. And they all laughed sweetly at her, being overjoyed at her dancing. When the dance was done, the red foliot called the Kagu to him, and made her sit on the bench beside him, and stroked her soft grey feathers, and made much of her. All bashfully she sat beside the red folio, casting her ruby eyes in wonder upon the witches and their company. Next the red folio called for his cat-bears, that stood before him foxy red above, but with black bellies, round furry faces, and innocent amber eyes, and soft great paws, and tails barred alternately with ruddy rings and creamy. And he said, "O cat, bears, dance before us, since dearly we delight in your dancing." They asked, "Lord, will you?" "That we perform the gigoo." And he answered them, "The gigoo, and ye love me." So the stringed instruments began a swift movement, and the tambourines and triangles entered on the beat, and swiftly twinkled the feet of the cat-bears in the joyous dance. The music rippled and ran, and the dancers danced, till the hall was a-whirl with the rhythm of their dancing, and the witches roared applause. On a sudden, the music ceased, and the dancers were still, and standing side by side, paw in furry paw, they bowed shyly to the company. And the red folio called them to him, and kissed them on the mouth, and sent them to their seats, that they might rest and view the dances that were to follow. Next the red folio called for his white peacocks, coloured like moonlight, that they might lead the pavane before the lords of Witchland. In glorious wise did they spread their tails for the stately dance, and a fair and lovely sight it was to see their grace and the grandeur of their carriage as they moved to the music chaste and noble. With them were joined the golden pheasants, who spread wide their collars of gold, and the silver pheasants, and the peacock pheasants, and the estridges, and the bustards, footing it in pomp, pointing the toes, and bowing and retiring in due time to the solemn strains of the pavane. Every instrument took part in the stately pavane, the lutes and the dulcimers, and the theobos, and the sackbuts, and the hautboys, the fruits sweetly warbling as birds in the upper air, and the silver trumpets, and the horns that breathed deep melodies trembling with mystery and tenderness that shakes the heart, and the drum that beateth to battle, and the wild throb of the harp, and the cymbals clashing as the clash of armies. And a nightingale sitting by the red folio sang the pavane in passionate tones that dissolved the soul in their sweet, mournful beauty. The Lord Grow covered his face with his mantle and wept to hear and behold the divine pavane. For as ghosts rearisen, it raised up for him old happy half-forgotten days in Goblin Land, before he had conspired against King Gaslark and been driven forth from his dear native land, and exile in waterish Witchland. Thereafter let the red folioed give order for the galliard. Joyously swept forth the melody from the stringed instruments, and 2 dormice, fat as butter, spun into the hall. Wilder whirled the music, and the dormice capered ever higher till they bounded from the floor up to the beams of the vaulted roof and down again, and up again to the roof beams in the joyful dance. And the foliots joined in the galliard, spinning and capering in mad delight of the dance. And into the hall twirled 6 capripeds, footing it lightly as the music swept ever faster, and a one-footer that leaped hither and thither about and about as the flea hoppeth, till the witches grew hoarse with singing and shouting and hounding of him on. Yet ever capered the dormice higher and wilder than any else, and so swiftly flashed their little feet to the galloping music that no eye might follow their motion. But little enow was Lord Grow gladdened by the merry dance. Sad melancholy sat with him for his companion, darkening his thoughts and making joy hateful to him as sunshine to owls of the night, so that he was well pleased to mark the red foliot go softly from his seat on the dais and forth from the hall by a door behind the arras, and seeing this, himself departed softly amid the full tide of the galliard, forth of that hall of swift movement and gleeful laughter, forth into the quiet evening, where, above the smooth downs, the wind was lulled to sleep in the vast silent spaces of the sky, and the west was a bower of orange light fading to purple and unfathomable blue in the upper heaven, and naught was heard save the murmur of the sleepless sea, and naught seen save a flight of wild fowl flying against the sunset. In this quietness, Grow walked westward above the combe, until he came to the land's edge, and stood on the lip of a chalk cliff falling to the sea, and was ware of the red folio, alone on that high western cliff, gazing in a study at the dying colours in the west. When they had stood for a while without speech, gazing over the sea, Grow spake and said, "Consider how, as day now dieth in yonder chambers of the west, so hath the glory departed from Witchland." But the red foliot answered him not, being in a study. Then Grow said, "Though Demon Land lieth where thou sawest the sun descend, yet eastward out of Witchland must thou look for the morning splendour. Not more surely shalt thou behold the sun go up thence tomorrow than thou shalt see shine forth in short season the glory and honour and power of Witchland, and beneath her destructive sword her enemies shall be as grass before the sickle." The red folio said, "I am in love with peace, and the soft influence of the evening air. Leave me, or if thou wilt stay, break not the charm." "O red folio," said Grow, "art thou in love with peace indeed? So, should the rising again of Witchland tune sweet music to thy thought, since we of Witchland love peace, nor are we stirrers up of strife, but the demons only. The war against the ghouls, whereby the four corners of the earth was shaken, was hatched by Demonland." "Thou speakest," said the red folio, "clean against thine intention, a great praise of them. For who ever saw the like of these man-eating ghouls, for corruption of manners, inhuman degeneration, and deluge of iniquities? Who every 5th year from time immemorial have had their grand climacterical year, and but last year break forth in never-imagined ferocity. But if they sail now, 'tis on the dark lake they sail, grieving no earthly seas nor rivers. Praise Demonland, therefore, who did put them down forever." "I make no question of that," answered Lord Grow, "but foul water, as soon as fair, will quench hot fire. Sore against our will did we of Witchland join with the demons in that war, foreseeing, as hath been bloodily approved, that the issue must be but the puffing up of the demons, who desire no other thing than to be lords and tyrants of all the world." "Thou," said the red foliot, "waste in thy young days King Gaslark's man, a goblin born and bred, his very foster brother, nourished at the same breast. Why must I observe thee, a plain traitor against so good a king, whose perfidy the common people then did openly reprove, as I did well perceive, even so lately as last autumn, when I was in the city of Zahagzakulo at the time of their festivities for the betrothal of the king's cousin german, the Princess Armeline, unto the Lord Goldry Brusco, they carrying filthy pictures of thee in the street, singing of thee thus, it was pity. One so witty, malcontent, leaving reason, should to treason so be bent, but his gifts were but shifts, void of grace, and his bravery was but knavery, vile and base. Said Grow, wincing a little, the art of it agreeth well with the sentiment, and with the condition of those who invented it. I will not think so noble a prince as thou art will set thy sails to the wind of the rabble's most partial hates and envies. For the vile addition of traitor, I do reject and spit upon it, but true it is that, regarding not the god of fools and women, nice opinion, I do steer by mine own lodestar still. Howbeit, I came not to discourse to thee on so small a matter as myself. This I would say unto thee with most sad and serious entertain, be not lulled to think the demons will leave the world at peace, that is farthest from their intent. They would not listen to thy comfortable words, nor sit at meat with us, so set be they to imagine mischief against us. What? Said Jas. Witchland was ever as a flea, aye, as a flea which he itcheth to crush betwixt his fingernails. Oh, if thou be in love with peace, a short way lieth open to thy heart's desire. Naught spake the red folio, gazing still into the dim reflections of the sunset which lingered below a darkening sky where stars were born. Grohl said softly, as a cat purring, where softening unctions failed, sharp surgery bringeth speediest ease. Wilt thou not leave it to me? But the red folio looked angrily upon him, saying, What have I to do with your enmities? You are sworn to keep the peace, and I will not abide your violence, nor your breaking of oaths in my quiet kingdom. Grow said, Oaths be of the heart, and he that breaketh them in open fact is oft, as now, no breaker in truth, for already were they scorned and trampled on by his opposites. But the red folio said again, What have I to do with your enmities that set you by the ears like fighting dogs? I am yet to learn that he that hath a righteous heart, and clean hands, and hateth none, must needs be drawn into the brawls and manslayings of such as you and the demons. Lord Grow looked narrowly upon him, saying, Thinkest thou that the straight path of him that affecteth neither side lieth still open for thee? If that were thine aim, thou shouldst have bethought thee ere thou gavest thy judgment on the second bout. For clear as day it was to us, and to thine own people, and most of all to the demons, that the king played foul in that bout, and when thou calledst him victorious, thou didst loudly by that word trumpet thyself his friend, and unfriends to demonland. Markedest thou not, when they left the hall, with what a snake's eye Lord Just beheld thee? Not with us only, but with thee. He refused to eat and drink, that so his superstitious scruples may be unhurt when he proceeds to thy destruction. For on this are they determined, nothing is more certain. The red-foliod sank his chin upon his breast, and stood silent for a space. The hues of death and silence spread themselves where late the fires of sunset glowed, and large stars opened like flowers on the illimitable fields of the night sky. Arcturus, Spica, Gemini, and the little dog, and Capella and her kids. The red foliot said, Witchland lieth at my door. And Demonland, how stand I with Demonland? And Grow said, Also tomorrow's sun goeth up out of Witchland. For a while they spoke not. Then Lord Grow took forth a scroll from his bosom, and said, The harvest of this world is to the resolute, and he that is infirm of purpose is ground betwixt the upper and the nether millstone. Thou canst not turn back, so would they scorn and spurn thee, and we witches likewise. And now by these means only may lasting peace be brought about, namely, by the setting of Goris of Witchland on the throne of Demonland, and the utter humbling of that brood beneath the heel of the witches. The red folio said, Is not Goris slain? And drank we not? But now his Arvail, slain by a demon? And is he not the second in order of that line who hath so died by a demon? A 12th Gorish, said Gro. At this moment of time sitteth King in Kake. O red folio, know thou that I am a reader of the planets of the night, and of those hidden powers that work out the web of destiny, whereby I know that this 12th king of the house of Goris in Kaka shall be a most crafty warlock, full of guiles and wiles, who, by the might of his egromancy and the sword of Witchland, shall exceed all earthly powers that be. And ineluctable as the levin bolt of heaven goeth out his wrath against his enemies. So saying, Gro stooped and took a glowworm from the grass, saying kindly to it, Sweeting, thy lamp for a moment, and breathed upon it, and held it to the parchment, saying, Sign now thy royal name to these articles, which require thee not at all to go to war, but only, in case war shall arise, to be of our party, and against these demons that do privily pursue thy life. But the red folio said, Wherein am I certified that thou speakest not a lie? Then took Gro a writing from his purse, and showed thereon a seal like the seal of Lord Juice, and there was written, Unto Vol, a love and truste, and fail net whenas thou sailest upon Wicklande to cast of or if shippes for the Foliot Isles to put down, those and brenne the red Foliot in his house. For if we get nat the life of these worms chirted out of them, the shame will stick on us forever. And Gro said, My servant stole this from them while they spoke with thee in thine hall to-night. Which the red folio believed, and took from his belt his inkhorn and his pen, and signed his royal name to the articles of the treaty proposed to him. Therewith Lord Gro put up the parchment in his bosom, and said, Swift surgery. Needs must that we take them in their beds to-night. So shall tomorrow's dawn bring glory and triumph to Witchland, now fixed in an eclipse, and to the whole world peace and soft contentment. But the red folio answered him, My lord Gro, I have signed these articles, and thereby stand I bound in enmity to Demonland. But I will not bewray my guests that have eaten my salt, be they never so deeply pledged mine enemies. Be it known to thee, I have set guards on your booths this night, and on the booths of them of Demonland, that no unpeaceful deeds may be done betwixt you. This which I have done, by this will I stand, and ye shall both depart to morrow in peace, even as ye came. Because I am your friend, and sworn to your party, I and my foliots will be on your side when war is between Witchland and Demonland. But I will not suffer night slayings nor murders in my isles. Now with these words of the red foliot, Lord Gro was as one that walketh along a flowery path to his rest, and in the last steps a gulf yawneth suddenly athwart the path, and he standeth agape and disappointed at the hither side. Yet in his subtlety he made no sign, but straight replied, Righteously hast thou decreed, and wisely, O red foliot, for it was truly said, Let worthy minds ne'er stagger in distrust, to suffer death or shame for what is just, and that which we sow in darkness must unfold in the open light of day, lest it be found withered in the very hour of maturity. Nor would I have urged thee otherwise, but that I do truly fear these demons, and all my mind was to take their plotting in reverse. Do then one thing only for us, If we set sail homeward, and they on our heels, they will fall upon us at a disadvantage, for they have the swifter ship. Or if they get to sea before us, they will lie in wait for us on the high seas. Suffer us then to sail tonight, and do thou on some pretext delay them here for 3 days only, that we may get us home, or ever they leave the folioed isles. I will not gainsay thee in this, answered the red folio, for here is naught but what is fair and just, and lieth with mine honour. I will come to your booths at midnight, and bring you down to your ship. When Grow came to the witches' booths, he found them guarded, even as the red folio had said, and the booths of them of Demonland in like manner. So went he into the royal booth, where the king lay in state on a bier of spear shafts, robed in his kingly robes over his armour that was painted black and inlaid with gold, and the crown of Witchland on his head. 2 candles burned at the head of King Goris, and 2 at his feet, and the night wind blowing through the crannies of the booth made them flare and flicker, so that shadows danced unceasingly on the wall and roof and floor. On the benches round the walls sat the lords of Witchland, sullen of countenance, for the wine was dead in them. Balefully they eyed Lord Grow at his coming in, and Corinius sate upright in his seat and said, Here is the goblin, father and fosterer of our misfortunes. Come, let us slay him. Grow stood among them with head erect, and held Corinius with his eye, saying, We of Witchland are not run lunatic, my lord Corinius, that we should do this gladness to the demons, to bite each at the other's throat like wolves. Methinks if Witchland be the land of my adoption only, yet have I not done least among you to ward off sheer destruction from her in this pass we stand in. If ye have aught against me, let me hear it and answer it. Corinius laughed a bitter laugh. Hearken to the fool. Are we babies and milksops, thinkest thou? And is it not clear as day thou stoodest in the way of our falling on the demons, when we might have done so, urging what silly counsels I know not in favour of doing it by night? And now is night come, and we close prisoned in our booths, and no chance to come at them, unless we would bring an hornet's nest of foliates about our ears, and give warning of our intent to the demons and every living soul in this island. And all this has come about since thy slinking off and plotting with the red foliot. But now hath thy guile overreached itself, and now we will kill thee, and so an end of thee and thy plotting. With that Corinius sprang up and drew his sword, and the other witches with him. But Lord Grow moved not an eyelid, only he said, Hear mine answer first. All night lieth before us, and 'tis but a moment's task to murder me. Therewith stood forth the Lord Corrund with his huge bulk betwixt Grow and Corinius, saying in a great voice, Whoso shall point weapon, 'gainst him shall first have to do with me, though it were one of my sons. We will hear him. If he clear not himself, then will we hew him in pieces. They sat down muttering. And Grow spake and said, First behold this parchment, which is the articles of a solemn covenant and alliance, and behold where the red foliot hath set his sign manual thereto. True, his is a country of no might in arms, and we might tread him down, and ne'er feel the leavings stick to our boot. And little avail can their weak help be unto us in the day of battle. But there is in these isles a meetly good road and riding place for ships, which, if our enemies should occupy, their fleet were most aptly placed to do us all the ill imaginable. Is then this treaty a light benefit where now we stand? Next, know that when I counselled you take the demons in their beds, stead of fall upon them in the foliot's hall, I did so, being advertised that the red foliote had commanded his soldiers to turn against us or against the demons, whichever first should draw sword upon the other. And when I went forth from the hall, it was, as Corineus hath so deeply divined, to plot with the red foliote. But the aim of my plotting I have shown you, on these articles of alliance. And indeed, had I, as Corineus vilely accuseth me, practised with the red foliote against Witchland, I had hardly been so simple as return into the mouth of destruction, when I might abide it safely in his palace. Now, when Grow perceived that the anger of the witches against him was appeased by his defence, wherein he spake cunningly, both true words and lies, he spake again among them, saying, Little gain have I of all my pains and thought expended by me for Witchland, and better it were for Witchland if my counsel were better heeded. Corund knoweth how. To mine own peril I counselled the king to wrestle no more after the first bout, and if he had tarn my rede, rather than suspect me and threaten me with death, we should not be now to bear him home dead to the royal catacombs in Carca. Corund said, Truly hast thou spoken. In one thing only have I failed, said Grow, and it can shortly be amended. The red folio, albeit of our party, will not be one to attack the demons by fraud, nor will he suffer us smite them in these isles. Some fond, simple scruples hang like cobwebs in his mind, and he is stubborn as touching this. But I have prevailed upon him to make them tarry here for 3 days' space, while we put to sea this very night, telling him, which he most innocently believeth, that we fear the demons, and would flee home ere they be let loose to take us at a disadvantage on the high seas. And home we will indeed ere they set sail, yet not for fear of them, but rather that we may devise a deadly blow against them, or ever they win home to Demonland. What blow, goblin? Said Corineus. And Grow answered and said, One that I will devise upon with our lord the king, Goris the 16th, who now awaiteth us in Carci, and I will not blab it to a wine-bibber and a dicer who hath but now drawn sword against a true lover of Witchland. Whereupon Corineus leaped up in mickle wrath to thrust his sword into Grow. But Corund and his sons restrained him. In due time the stars revolved to midnight, and the red foliote came secretly with his guards to the witches' booths. The lords of Witchland took their weapons, and the men-at-arms bare the goods. And the king went in the midst on his bier of spear-shafts. So went they, picking their way in the moonless night round the palace and down the winding path that led to the bed of the combe, and so by the stream westward toward the sea. Here they deemed it safe to light a torch to show them the way. Desolate and bleak showed the sides of the combe in the wind-blown flare, and the flare was thrown back from the jewels of the royal crown of Witchland, and from the armoured buskins on the king's feet, showing stark with toes pointing upward from below his bearskin mantle, and from the armour and the weapons of them that bare him and walked beside him, and from the black cold surface of the little river hurrying for ever over its bed of boulders to the sea. The path was rugged and stony, and they fared slowly, lest they should stumble and drop the king. Of the hold of Carc, and of the midnight practices of King Goris III. In the ancient chamber, preparing dole and doom for the lords of Demonland, when the witches were come aboard of their ship, and all stowed, and the rowers set in order on the benches, they bade farewell to the red foliote and rowed out to the deep, and there hoisted sail and put up their helm and sailed eastward along the land. The stars wheeled overhead, and the east grew pale, and the sun came out of the sea on the larboard bow. Still sailed they 2 days and 2 nights, And on the third day there was land ahead, and morning rose abated by mist and cloud, and the sun was as a ball of red fire over Witchland in the east. So they hung a while off Tenemos, waiting for the tide, and at high water sailed over the bar and up the Druima past the dunes and mudflats and the Irgaspian mere, till they reached the bend of the river below Karka. Solitary marsh land stretched on either side as far as the eye might reach, with clumps of willow and rare homesteads showing above the flats. Northward above the bend, a bluff of land fell sharply to the elbow of the river, and on the other side sloped gently away for a few miles till it lost itself in the dead level of the marshes. On the southern face of the bluff, monstrous as a mountain in those low sedge lands, hung square and black, the fortress of Kaki. It was built of black marble, rough-hewn and unpolished, the outworks enclosing many acres. An inner wall, with a tower at each corner, formed the main stronghold, in the southwest corner of which was the palace, overhanging the river. And on the southwest corner of the palace, towering sheer from the water's edge 70 cubits and more to the battlements, stood the keep, a round tower lined with iron, bearing on the corbel table beneath its parapet, in varying form and untold repetition, the sculptured figure of the crab of Witchland. The outer ward of the fortress was dark with cypress trees, black flames burning changelessly to heaven from a billowy sea of gloom. East of the keep was the water gate, and beside it a bridge and bridge house across the river, strongly fortified with turrets and machicolations, and commanded from on high by the battlements of the keep. Dismal and fearsome to view was this strong place of Kaki, most like to the embodied soul of dreadful night brooding on the waters of that sluggish river, by day a shadow in broad sunshine, the likeness of pitiless violence sitting in the place of power, darkening the desolation of the mournful fen. By night, a blackness more black than night herself. Now was the ship made fast near the water-gate, and the lords of Witchland landed and their fighting men, and the gate opened to them, and mournfully they entered in and climbed the steep ascent to the palace, bearing with them their sad burden of the king. And in the great hall in Karka was Gorish, too, was Gorish Dublin Fur, laid in state for that night, and the day wore to its close. Nor was any word from King Goris the 12th. But when the shades of night were falling, there came a chamberlain to Lord Grow as he walked upon the terrace without the western wall of the palace, and the chamberlain said, "My lord, the king bids you attend him in the iron tower, and he chargeth you, bring unto him the royal crown of Witchland." Grow made haste to fulfill the bidding of the king, and betook himself to the great banqueting hall, and all reverently he lifted the iron crown of Witchland, set thick with priceless gems, and went by a winding stair to the tower, and the chamberlain went before him. When they were come to the first landing, the chamberlain knocked on a massive door that was forthwith opened by a guard, and the chamberlain said, "My lord, it is the king's will that you attend his majesty in his secret chamber at the top of the tower." And Grow marvelled, for none had entered that chamber for many years. Long ago had Goris the 7th practised forbidden arts therein, and folk said that in that chamber he raised up those spirits whereby he gate his bane. Sithence was the chamber sealed, nor had the late kings need of it, since little faith they placed in art, magical, relying rather on the might of their hands and the sword of Witchland. But Grow was glad at heart, for the opening of this chamber by the king met his designs halfway. Fearlessly he mounted the winding stairs that were dusky with the shadows of approaching night, and hung with cobwebs and strewn with the dust of neglect, until he came to the small, low door of that chamber, and pausing, knocked thereon, and hearkened for the answer. And one said from within, "Who knocketh?" And Grow answered, "Lord, it is I, Grow." And the bolts were drawn, and the door opened, and the king said, "Enter." And Grow entered, and stood in the presence of the king. Now the fashion of the chamber was that it was round, filling the whole space of the loftiest floor of the round donjon keep. It was now gathering dusk, and weak twilight only entered through the deep embrasures of the windows that pierced the walls of the tower, looking to the four quarters of the heavens. A furnace glowing in the big hearth threw fitful gleams into the recesses of the chamber, lighting up strange shapes of glass and earthenware, flasks and retorts, balances, hourglasses, crucibles and astrolabes, a monstrous three-necked alembic of phosphorescent glass supported on a bain-marie, and other instruments of doubtful and unlawful aspect. Under the northern window, over against the doorway, was a massive table blackened with age, whereon lay great books bound in black leather with iron guards and heavy padlocks. And in a mighty chair beside this table was King Garis the 20th, robed in his conjuring robe of black and gold, resting his cheek on his hand that was lean as an eagle's claw. The low light, mother of shade and secrecy, that hovered in that chamber moved about the still figure of the king, his nose hooked as the eagle's beak, his cropped hair, his thick, close-cut beard and shaven upper lip, his high cheekbones and cruel heavy jaw, and the dark eaves of his brows, whence the glint of green eyes showed as no friendly lamp to them without. The door shut noiselessly, and Grow stood before the king. The dusk deepened, and the firelight pulsed and blinked in that dread chamber, and the king leaned without motion on his hand, bending his brow on Grow, and there was utter silence save for the faint purr of the furnace. In a while the king said, "I sent for thee, because thou alone wast so hardy as to urge to the uttermost thy counsel upon the king that is now dead, Goris the ex-Thefant, of memory ever glorious, and because thy counsel was good. Marvellest thou that I wist of thy counsel?" Grow said, "O my lord the king, I marvel not of this, for it is known to me that the soul endureth, albeit the body perish." "Keep thou thy lips from over-speech," said the king. "These be mysteries whereon but to think may snatch thee into peril, and whoso speaketh of them, though in so secret a place as this, and with me only, yet at his most bitter peril speaketh he." Grow answered, "O king, I spake not lightly. Moreover, you did tempt me by your questioning. Nevertheless, I am utterly obedient to your majesty's admonition." The king rose from his chair and walked towards Grow slowly. He was exceeding tall and lean as a starved cormorant. Laying his hands upon the shoulders of Grow and bending his face to Grow's, "Art not afeard," he asked, "to abide me in this chamber at the close of day? Or hast not thought on't, and on these instruments thou seest their use and purpose, and the ancient use of this chamber?" Grow blenched, never a whit, but stoutly said, "Oh, I am not afeard, O my lord the king, but rather rejoiced I at your summons, for it jumpeth with mine own designs, when I took counsel secretly in my heart after the woes that the fates fulfilled for Witchland in the Foliot Isles. For in that day, O king, when I beheld the light of Witchland darkened and her might abated in the fall of King Goris the 7th, of glorious memory, I thought on you, Lord, the 12th Garis raised up King Inkaka, and there was present to my mind the word of the soothsayer of old, where he singeth 10, 11, 12. I see, in sequent variety of puissance and mastery, with sword, sinews, and gramarye, in the hold of Carque Lordinge it royally, and being minded that he singleth out you, the 12th, as potent in gramarye, all my care was that these demons should be detained within reach of your spells until we should have time to win home to you and to apprise you of their farings. That so you might put forth your power and destroy them by art magic, or ever they come safe again to many-mountained demon land. The king took Grow to his bosom and kissed him, saying, Art thou not a very jewel of wisdom and discretion? Let me embrace thee, and love thee for ever. Then the king stood back from him, keeping his hands on Grow's shoulders, and gazed piercingly upon him for a space in silence. Then kindled he a taper that stood in an iron candlestick by the table where the books lay, and held it to Grow's face. And the king said, Aye, wise thou art, and of good discretion, and some courage hast thou. But if thou be to serve me this night, needs must I try thee first with terrors, till thou be inured to them, as tried gold runneth in the crucible, or if thou be base metal only, till that thou be eaten up by them. Grow said unto the king, For many years, Lord, or ever I came to Karka, I fared up and down the world, and I am acquainted with objects of terror as a child, with his toys. I have seen in the southern seas, by the light of Achenar and Canopus, giant sea-horses battling with 8-legged cuttlefishes in the whirlpools of the Corsh. Yet was I unafraid. I was in the isle Sionar when the fires of the Pict brast forth in that isle and split it, as a man's skull is split with an axe, and the green gulfs of the sea swallowed that isle. And the stench and the steam hung in the air for days where the burning rock and earth had sizzled in the ocean. Yet was I unafraid. Also was I with Gazlark in the flight out of Zakulo, when the ghouls took the palace over our heads, and portents walked in his halls in broad daylight. And the ghouls conjured the sun out of heaven. Yet was I unafraid. And for 30 days and 30 nights wandered I alone on the face of the Moruna in Upper Impland, where scarce a living soul hath been, and there the evil wights that people. The air of that desert dogged my steps and gibbered at me in darkness. Yet was I unafraid, and came in due time to Morna Moruna, and thence, standing on the lip of the escarpment, as it were on the edge of the world, looked south away, where never mortal eye had gazed aforetime, across the untrodden forests of the Bavinan. And in that skyey distance, preeminent beyond range on range of ice-robed mountains, I beheld 2 peaks throned forever between firm land and heaven, in unearthly loveliness, the spires and airy ridges of Kostra Pivracha, and the wild precipices that soar upward from the abysses to the queenly silent snow dome of Kostra Belorn. When Grow had ended, the king turned him away and, taking from a shelf a retort filled with a dark blue fluid, set it on a bain-marie and a lamp thereunder. Fumes of a faint purple hue came forth from the neck of the retort, and the king gathered them in a flask. He made signs over the flask, and shook forth into his hand therefrom a fine powder. Then said he unto Grow, holding out the powder in the open palm of his hand, Look narrowly at this powder. And Grow looked. The king muttered an incantation, and the powder moved and heaved, and was like a crawling mass of cheese mites in an overripe cheese. It increased in volume in the king's hand, and Grow perceived that each particular grain had legs. The grains grew before his eyes, and became the size of mustard seeds, and then of barleycorns, swiftly crawling each over other. And even as he marvelled, they waxed great as kidney beans, and now was their shape and seeming clear to him, so that he beheld that they were small frogs and paddocks, and they overflowed from the king's hand as they waxed swiftly in size, pouring onto the floor. And they ceased not to increase and grow. And now were they large as little dogs, nor might the king retain more than a single one. Holding his hand under its belly while it waved its legs in the air, and they were walking on the tables and jostling on the floor. Pallid they were, and permeable to light like thin horn, and their hue a faint purple, even as the hue of the vapour whence they were engendered. And now was the room filled with them, so that they mounted perforce one on another's shoulders, and they were of the bigness of well-fatted hogs. And they goggled their eyes at Grow and croaked. The king looked narrowly on Grow, who stood in the presence of that spectacle, the crown of Witchland in his hands. And the king marked that the crown trembled not a whit in Grow's hands that held it. So he said a certain word, and the paddocks and the frobs grew small again, shrinking more swiftly than they had grown, and so vanished. The king now took from the shelf a ball the size of the egg of an ostrich, of dark green glass. He said unto Grow, Look well at this glass, and tell me what thou seest. Grow answered him, I see a shifting shadow within. The king commanded him, saying, Dash it down with all thy strength upon the floor. The Lord Grow lifted the ball with both hands above his head, and it was ponderous as a ball of lead. And according to the command of Goris the king, he hurled it on the floor, so that it was pashed in pieces. And, behold, a puff of thick smoke burst forth from the fragments of the ball, and took the form of one of human shape and dreadful aspect, whose 2 legs were 2 writhing snakes, and it stood in the chamber so tall that the head of it touched the vaulted ceiling, viewing the king and Grow malevolently and menacing them. The king caught down a sword that hung against the wall, and put it in Grow's hand, shouting, Smite off the legs of it, and delay not, or thou art but dead. Grow smote and cut off the left leg of the evil wight, easily as it were cutting of butter. But from the stump came forth 2 fresh snakes a-writhing, and so it fared likewise with the right leg. But the king shouted, Smite and cease not, or thou art but a dead dog. And ever as Grow hewed a snake in twain, forth came 2 more from the wound, till the chamber was a maze of their riddling forms. And still Grow hewed with a will, until the sweat stood on his brow, and he said, panting between the strokes, O king, I have made him many-legged as a centipede. Must I make him a myriapod ere night's decline? And the king smiled, and spake a word of hidden meaning, and therewith the turmoil was gone, as a gust of wind departeth, and naught left save the shivered splinters of the green ball on the chamber floor. Wast not afeard? Asked the king, and when Grow said nay, Methinks these sights of terror should much afflict thee, said the king, since well I know thou art not skilled in art magical. Yet am I a philosopher, answered Lord Grow, and somewhat know I of alchemy and the hidden properties of this material world, the virtues of herbs, plants, stones, and minerals, the ways of the stars in their courses, and the influences of those heavenly bodies. And I have held converse with birds and fishes in their degree, and that generation which creepeth on the earth is not held in scorn by me, but oft talk. I in sweet companionship with the eft of the pond, and the glowworm, and the ladybird, and the pismire, and their kind, making them my little gossips, so have I. A certain law which lighteth me in the outer court of the secret temple of gramarye, and art forbid, albeit I have not peered within that temple. And by my philosophy, O king, I am certified concerning these apparitions which you have raised for me, that they be illusions and phantasms only, able to terrify the soul indeed of him that knoweth not divine philosophy, but without bodily power or essence. Nor is aught to fear in such, save the fear itself wherewith they strike the simple. Then said the king, By what token knowest thou this? And the Lord Grow made answer unto him, O king, as a child weaveth a daisy chain, thus easily did you conjure up these shapes of terror. Not in such wise fareth he that calleth out of the deep the deadly terror indeed, but with toil and sweat, and with straining of thought, will, heart, and sinew fareth he. The king smiled. Thou sayest true. Now, therefore, since phantasmagoria maketh not thy heart to quail, I present thee a more material horror. And he lighted the candles in the great candlesticks of iron, and opened a little secret door in the wall of the chamber near the floor. And Grow beheld iron bars within the little door, and heard a hissing from behind the bars. The king took a key of silver of delicate construction, the handle slender and 3 spans in length, and opened the iron-grated door. And the king said, Behold and see, that which sprung from the egg of a cock, hatched by the deaf adder. The glance of its eye sufficeth to turn to stone any living thing that standeth before it. Were I but for one instant to loose my spells whereby I hold it in subjection, in that moment would end my life, days, and thine. So strong in properties of ill is this serpent, which the ancient enemy that dwelleth in darkness hath placed upon this earth, to be a bane unto the children of men, but an instrument of might in the hand of enchanters and sorcerers. Therewith came forth that offspring of perdition from its hole, strutting erect on its 2 legs that were the legs of a cock, and a cock's head it had, with rosy comb and wattles, but the face of it like no fowl's face of Middle-earth, but rather a Gorgon's out of hell. Black shining feathers grew on its neck, but the body of it was the body of a dragon, with scales that glittered in the rays of the candles, and a scaly crest stood on its back, and its wings were like bats' wings, and its tail, the tail of an aspic with a sting in the end thereof, and from its beak its forked tongue flickered venomously, and the stature of the thing was a little above a cubit. Now because of the spells of King Goris, whereby he held it ensorcelled, it might not cast its baneful glance upon him, nor upon Grow, but it walked back and forth in the candlelight, averting its eyes from them. The feathers on its neck were fluffed up with anger, and wondrous swiftly twirled its scaly tail, and it hissed ever more fiercely, irked by the bonds of the king's enchantment, and the breath of it was noisome, and hung in sluggish wreaths about the chamber. So for a while it walked before them, and as it looked sidelong past him, Grow beheld the light of its eyes, that were as sick moons burning poisonously through a mist of greenish yellow in the dusk of night, and strong loathing seized him, so that his gorge rose to behold the thing, and his brow and the palms of his hands became clammy, and he said, My lord the king, I have looked steadfastly on this cockatrice, and it affrighteth me no whit, but it is loathly in my sight, so that my gorge riseth because of it. And with that he fell a-vomiting. And the king commanded that serpent back into its hole, whither it returned, hissing wrathfully. Now the king poured forth wine, speaking a charm over the cup, and when the bright wine had revived Lord Grow, the king spake, saying, It is well, O Grow, that thou hast shown thyself a philosopher, indeed, and of heart intrepid. Yet even as no blade is utterly tried until one try it in very battle, where if it snap woe and doom wait on the hand that wields it, so must thou in this midnight suffer a yet fiercer furnace, heat of terror, wherein if thou be reduced, we are both lost eternally, and this carker and all witchland blasted with us for ever in ruin and oblivion. Durst abide this trial? Grow answered, I am hot to obey your word, O king, for well know I that it is idle to hope by phantoms and illusions to appal the demons, and that against the demons the deadly eye of thy cockatrice were turned in vain. Stout of heart are they, and instructed in all lore, and just a sorcerer of ancient power. Who hath charms to blunt the glance of basilisk or cockatrice? He that would strike down the demons must conjure indeed. Great, said the king, is the strength and cunning of the seed of Demonland. By main strength have they now shown mastery over us, as sadly witnesseth the overthrow of Goris the Life. The peat. Against whom no mortal could stand up and wrestle and not die, till cursed Goldry, drunk with spleen and envy, slew him in the foliate isles. Nor was there any aforetime to outdo us in feats of arms. And Goris X, victorious in single combats without number, made our name glorious over all the world. Yet at the last he gat his death, out of all expectation, and by what treacherous sleight I know not, standing in single combat against the curled step-dancer from Crothering. But I, that am skilled in gramarye, do bear a mightier engine against the demons than brawny sinews or the sword that smiteth asunder. Yet is mine engine perilous to him that useth it. Therewith the king unlocked the greatest of those books that lay by on the massive table, saying in Gro's ear, as one who would not be overheard, "This is that awful book of gramarye, wherewith in this same chamber, on such a night, Goris the seventh stirred the vasty deep. And know that from this circumstance alone ensued the ruin of King Goris the seventh. In that, having by his hellish science conjured up somewhat from the primeval dark, and being utterly fordone with the sweat and stress of his conjuring, his mind was clouded for a moment, in such sort that either he forgot the words writ in this gramarye, or the page whereon they were writ, or speech failed him to speak those words that must be spoken, or might to do those things which must be done to complete the charm. Wherefore he kept not his power over that which he had called out of the deep, but it turned upon him and tare him limb from limb. Such like doom will I avoid, renewing in these latter days those self-same spells, if thou dost stand by me undismayed the while I utter my incantations. And shouldst thou mark me fail or waver ere all be accomplished, then shalt thyself lay hand on book and crucible, and fulfil whatsoever is needful, as I shall first show thee. Or quailest thou at this? Gro said, Lord, show me my task, and I will carry it, though all the furies of the pit flock to this chamber to say me nay. So the king instructed Gro, rehearsing to him those acts that were needful, and making known unto him the divers pages of the gramarye, whereon were writ those words which must be spoken each in its due time and sequence. But the king pronounced not yet those words, pointing only to them in the book. For whoso speaketh those words in vain and out of season is lost. And now when the retorts and beakers with their several necks and tubes and the appurtenances thereof were set in order, and the unhallowed processes of fixation, conjunction, deflagration, putrefaction, and rubification were nearing maturity, and the baleful star, Antares, standing by the astrolabe within a little of the meridian, signified the instant approach of midnight. The king described on the floor with his conjuring rod 3 pentacles enclosed within a 7-pointed star, with the signs of Cancer and of Scorpio joined by certain runes. And in the midst of the star he limned the image of a green crab eating of the sun. And turning to the 73rd page of his great black gramarye, the king recited in a mighty voice words of hidden meaning, calling on the name that it is a sin to utter. Now when he had spoken the first spell and was silent, there was a deadly quiet in that chamber, and a chill in the air as of winter. And in the quiet Gro heard the king's breath coming and going, as of one who hath rowed a course. Now the blood rushed back to Gro's heart, and his hands and feet became cold, and a cold sweat brake forth on his brow. But for all that, he held yet his courage firm and his brain ready. The king motioned to Gro to break off the tail of a certain drop of black glass that lay on the table, and with the snapping of its tail, the whole drop fell in pieces in a coarse black powder. Gro, by the king's direction, gathered that powder and dropped it in the great alembic, wherein a green fluid seethed and bubbled above the flame of a lamp, and the fluid became red as blood, and the body of the alembic filled with a tawny smoke, and sparks of sun-like brilliance flashed and crackled through the smoke. Thereupon distilled from the neck of the alembic a white oil, incombustible, and the king dipped his rod in that oil, and described round the 7-pointed star on the floor the figure of the worm, Ouroboros, that eateth his own tail. And he wrote the formula of the crab below the circle, and spake his second spell. When that was done, yet more biting seemed the night air, and yet more like the grave the stillness of the chamber. The king's hand shook as with an ague as he turned the pages of the mighty book. Gro's teeth chattered in his head. He gritted them together and waited. And now through every window came a light into the chamber, as of skies paling to the dawn. Yet not wholly so, for never yet came dawn at midnight, nor from all 4 quarters of the sky at once, nor with such swift strides of increasing light, nor with a light so ghastly. The candle flames burned filmy as the glare waxed strong from without, an evil, pallid light of bale and corruption, wherein the hands and faces of the king Goris and his disciple showed death pale, and their lips black as the dark skin of a grape, where the bloom has been rubbed off from it. The king cried terribly, "The hour approacheth," and he took a phial of crystal containing a decoction of wolf's jelly and salamander's blood, and dropped 7 drops from the alembic into the phial, and poured forth that liquor on the figure of the crab drawn on the floor. Gro leaned against the wall, weak in body, but with will unbowed. So bitter was the cold that his hands and feet were benumbed, and the liquor from the phial congealed where it fell. Yet the sweat stood in beads on the forehead of the king, by reason of the mighty striving that was his. And in the overpowering glare of that light from the underskis, he stood stiff and erect, hands clenched and arms outstretched, and spake the words, "Lyuro, vopo, voro, obo, o, oku, o, o. O. Ku." Now, with those words spoken, the vivid light departed as a blown-out lamp, and the midnight closed down again without. Nor was any sound heard save the thick panting of the king, but it was as if the night held its breath in expectation of that which was to come, and the candles sputtered and burned blue. The king swayed and clutched the table with his left hand, and again the king pronounced terribly the word Vork Shadumia. Thereafter, for the space of 10 heart, beat silence hung like a kestrel poised in the listening night. Then went a crash through earth and heaven, and a blinding wildfire through the chamber as it had been a thunderbolt. All Karka quaked, and the chamber was filled with a beating of wings, like the wings of some monstrous bird. The air that was wintry cold waxed on a sudden hot as the breath of a burning mountain, and Gro was near choking with the smell of soot and the smell of brimstone, and the chamber rocked as a ship riding in a swell with the wind against the tide. But the king, steadying himself against the table and clutching the edge of it till the veins on his lean hand seemed nigh to bursting, cried in short breaths and with an altered voice, "By these figures drawn, and by these spells enchanted, by the unction of wolf and salamander, by the unblessed sign of Cancer, now leaning to the sun, and by the fiery heart of Scorpio that flameth in this hour on night's meridian, thou art my thrall and instrument. Abase thee and serve me, worm of the pit. Else will I by and by summon out of ancient night intelligences and dominations mightier far than thou, and they shall serve mine ends, and thee shall they chain with chains of quenchless fire, and drag thee from torment to torment through the deep." Therewith the earthquake was stilled, And there remained but a quivering of the walls and floor, and the wind of those unseen wings, and the hot smell of soot and brimstone burning. And speech came out of the teeming air of that chamber, strangely sweet, saying, "Accursed wretch that troublest our quiet, what is thy will?" The terror of that speech made the throat of Grow dry, and the hairs on his scalp stood up. The king trembled in all his members like a frightened horse, yet was his voice level, and his countenance unruffled as he said hoarsely, "Mine enemies sail at day break from the foliot isles. I loose thee against them as a falcon from my wrist. I give thee them. Turn them to thy will, how or where it skills not, so thou do, but break and destroy them off the face of the world. Away!" But now was the king's endurance clean spent, so that his knees failed him, and he sank like a sick man into his mighty chair. But the room was filled with a tumult as of rushing waters, and a laughter above the tumult like to the laughter of souls condemned. And the king was reminded that he had left unspoken that word which should dismiss his sending. But to such weariness was he now come, and so utterly was his strength gone out from him in the exercise of his spells, that his tongue clave to the roof of his mouth so that he might not speak the word, and horribly he rolled up the whites of his eyes, beckoning to Grow, the while his nerveless fingers sought to turn the heavy pages of the gramarye. Then sprang Grow forth to the table, and against it sprawling. For now was the great keep of Khaki shaken anew, as one shaketh a dice-box, and lightnings opened the heavens, and the thunder roared unceasingly, and the sound of waters stunned the ear in that chamber, and still that laughter pealed above the turmoil. And Grow knew that it was now with the king even as it had been with Goris the Seventh, in years gone by, when his strength gave forth, and the spirit tear him and plastered those chamber walls with his blood. Yet was Grow mindful, even in that hideous storm of terror, of the 97th page, whereon the king had shown him the word of dismissal, and he wrenched the book from the king's palsied grasp and turned to the page. Scarce had his eye found the word, when a whirlwind of hail and sleet swept into the chamber, and the candles were blown out and the tables overset. And in the plunging darkness beneath the crashing of the thunder, Grow, pitching headlong, felt claws clasp his head and body. He cried in his agony the word, that was the word, trips, seer, copsum, and so fell a-swooning. It was high noon when the Lord Grow came to his senses in that chamber. The strong spring sunshine poured through the southern window, lighting up the wreckage of the night. The tables were cast down and the floor strewn and splashed with costly essences and earths spilt from shattered phials and jars and caskets, aphroselmia, shell of gold, saffron of gold, asem, amianth, stypteria of Melos, confounded with mandragora, vinum ardens, sal ammoniac, devouring aqua regia, little pools and scattered globules of quicksilver, poisonous decoctions of toadstools and of yew-berries, monkshood, thorn-apple, wolf's bane and black hellebore, quintessences of dragon's blood and serpent's bile, and with these, splashed together and wasted, elixirs that wise men have died a-dreaming of, spiritus mundi, and that sovereign alkahest, which dissolveth every substance dipped therein, and that aurum potabile, which being itself perfect, induceth perfection in the living frame. And in this welter of spoiled treasure were the great conjuring books hurled amid the ruin of retorts and aludels of glass and lead and silver, sand baths, mattresses, spatulae, athanors, and other instruments innumerable of rare design, tossed and broken on the chamber floor. The king's chair was thrown against the furnace, and huddled against the table lay the king, his head thrown back, his black beard pointing skyward, showing his sinewy, hairy throat. Grow looked narrowly at him, saw that he seemed unhurt, and slept deep. And so, knowing well that sleep is a present remedy for every ill, watched by the king in silence all day till supper time, for all he was sore and hungered. When at length the king awoke, he looked about him in amaze. "Methought I tripped at the last step of last night's journey," he said, "and truly strange riot hath left its footprints in my chamber." Grow answered, "Lord, sorely was I tried, yet fulfilled I your behest." The king laughed as one whose soul is at ease, and standing upon his feet said unto Grow, "Take up the crown of Witchland, and crown me. And that high honour shalt thou have, because I do love thee, for this night gone by." Now without were the lords of Witchland assembled in the courtyard, being bound for the great banqueting hall to eat and drink, unto whom the king came forth from the gate below the keep, robed in his conjuring robe. Wondrous bright sparkled the gems of the iron crown of Witchland above the heavy brow and cheekbones, and the fierce disdainful lip of the king, as he stood there in his majesty, and Grow with the guard of honour stood in the shadow of the gate. And the king said, "My lords, Corund and Corsus and Corinius and Galandus, and ye sons of Corsus and of Corund, and ye other witches, behold your king, the 12th Garis, crowned with this crown in Carca to be king of Witchland and of Demonland. And all countries of the world and the rulers thereof, so many as the sun doth spread his beams over, shall do me obeisance, and call me king and lord." All they shouted assent, praising the king and bowing down before him. Then said the king, "Imagine not that oath sworn unto the demons by Goris the Sethens, of memory ever glorious, bind me any whit. I will not be at peace with this Jus and his brethren, but do account them all mine enemies. And this night have I made ascending to take them on the waste of waters as they sail homeward to many-mountained Demonland." Corund said, "Lord, your words are as wine unto us, and well we guessed that the principalities of darkness were afoot last night, seeing all Carca rocked, and the foundations thereof rose and fell as the breast of the large earth a-breathing." When they were come into the banqueting hall, the king said, "Grow shall sit at my right hand this night, since manfully hath he served me." And when they scowled at this, and spake each in the other's ear, the king said, "Whoso among you shall so serve me, and so water the growth of this Witchland, as hath grow in this night gone by, unto him will I do like honour." But unto Grow he said, "I will bring thee home to Goblin land in triumph, that wentest forth an exile. I will pluck Gaslark from his throne, and make thee king in Zar-Jagzakulo, and all Goblin land shalt thou hold for me in fee, exercising dominion over it.